It didn't solve ISIS. It may have got rid of one person. So what I'm saying is that it's not that there isn't a place. You know, the French police, this is where I disagree with Jeremy Corbyn. Did anyone hear what Jeremy Corbyn said after the French attacks? He said, go in and try and arrest them. No, the guy's got a suicide vest on, right? I mean, you know, the best thing to do is shoot him in the head before he blows up the whole room and kills everyone, before he can pull that string on the suicide vest. So Corbyn's view is a bit naive and he's retracted from it. He's changed and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Good, because that's how you're going to get everyone killed. If you just try and go and arrest the guy, you're going to get killed, everyone else is going to get blown up as well. So it's not that I'm a pacifist. What I'm saying is there is a role for killing people when they're like that. When they're in a music concert and he's got a suicide vest on, the best thing you can do is set a sniper on the roof and take him out before he takes everyone else out. But that doesn't solve the problem. It solves that immediate tactical situation. It doesn't solve the long-term jihadist insurgency that I'm talking about. So that was my point.
But wouldn't wiping out all of the jihadist leaders, aggressive ones, sort of stop the problem and cause lessen the spread of ideology?
Well, it didn't. That's what Bin Laden. Have you heard of Bin Laden's kill list?
Yes.
Sorry, Bin Laden. Obama's kill list. Yeah. He had a kill. The president of the United States had a secret kill list on which he had the names of all these people he wanted to kill. They included American citizens, by the way, like Olaki, who was in Yemen. And they went about, and actually, people think Bush was a warmonger. Well, he was, but Obama had more drone strikes than Bush ever did. Bush illegally invaded a country, in my personal opinion, but you know, he didn't have a kill list that could just basically, on the president's say-so, go around executing people, which is what Obama has. It didn't solve the problem. Now, I'm not going to argue about the merits and the demerits, because we just had that conversation about taking out individual leaders. What I'm saying is, it doesn't solve the long-term problem either way. What happened instead is we killed Bin Laden, we started killing actually all of their operational leaders. We killed the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, we killed the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, we killed the leader of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, North Africa, right? We killed the leader of Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. Actually, these are real examples. We've killed all of those leaders of Al-Qaeda in all of those franchises. It's metastasized, a bit like Medusa's head, the Hydra, just keeps growing more heads, because that's the difference between an insurgency and Al Capone. Anyone know a bit of history about the Prohibition in America and Al Capone? Al Capone was the leader of this kind of mafiosi-like gang, right? And so when America banned alcohol, they needed to, these gangs emerged that were trading in illegal alcohol, right? That wasn't an ideology, it wasn't insurgency, it's organized crime, it's a bit different, right? So you take out the leader of the mafia, you've destroyed the hierarchy of this crime organization, and it can't function after that. An insurgency is very different. An insurgency is like what happened in Vietnam. It's like what happened for many, many years in Northern Ireland. You cannot kill your way out of it because the people have sympathy with, some people have sympathy with what they're representing, so they replace them. And that's what's happening, unfortunately, with Al-Qaeda. And we can see some people have sympathy with them because there's 6,000 gone from Europe to join them. And actually last night, the French said, that 6,000 who've gone to join ISIS, what about those who are in France still? The French said, overnight, they said, we can't keep up. They said, they released this figure to the media. We're monitoring 13,000 suspects who are inside France who we suspect are sympathetic to ISIS. 13,000. So that's why I'm calling it an insurgency, because it has a level of support among the population. You can't just go around killing 13,000 people. Then you produce 26,000 against you. Their brothers, their daughters, their children, whatever. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes. I think situations like happened at the weekend does tend to bring out the worst in people in terms of our reaction. And I was curious to ask how much you think the rest of the Arab world, and I'm particularly thinking of the extremely rich Gulf states, could be doing to knock heads together. I don't know if that's quite the right term, but because clearly they have as much of a vested interest in trying to deal with ISIS or whatever we want to call it, as we in the West do.
More so. I don't believe they're doing enough at all. The Gulf states, different to Jordan and Turkey, different to Lebanon. But the Gulf Arab states, if you just look at the number of refugees they've accepted, compare Jordan, which is overwhelmed with Syrian refugees, Turkey, which has got hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees, Saudi Arabia took none and instead said, we'll build a mosque for them in Germany. It's the only way Saudi Arabia is thinking at the moment, is build a mosque for people. Right, so they've got a lot more to do in this, and especially because we even had this conversation about the gentleman here about the laws that they implement, many of their punishments are like ISIS punishments. There's a guy in prison in Saudi Arabia that's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. His name's Raif Badawi. He wrote a blog. That's all he did. And the Saudis sentenced him to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes to the back. And they've already lashed him 50 times. So in bursts of 50, they're going to whip this guy because he wrote a blog. He was just a free thinker, and he wrote this blog that was like, let's scrutinize some of our own practices. So if Saudi Arabia is lashing bloggers, what's the difference between what ISIS does? So they've got a lot more to do internally and externally in their responsibility, and I just wish the international community was a bit more forthcoming in their conversations with them, and perhaps there's a silver lining to becoming energy sufficient, in that we will no longer be dependent on oil coming from the Gulf, and we can begin having some of these conversations. Right at the back, yeah.
Just minor comparison of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, sort of blanket insurgent groups. Aren't they really two completely different animals? You have Al-Qaeda with the sort of cell-based terror structure, but then ISIS, you have a very discrete leader, as in the Caliph al-Baghdadi,
Yeah.
and everything stems from him.
Yeah.
So ISIS, Al-Qaeda, I understand you saying that killing leaders wouldn't change anything. But if you killed the Caliph himself, wouldn't that really behead ISIS? In the true sense?
Well, they just replaced the Caliph.
But
They've
isn't
already.
he holding it together as sort of cult of personality? To an extent?
No. No, there's an ideological bond between them. It's like, Marx didn't have to set up the USSR, but he had the ideas. Lenin came along, led the Bolshevik Revolution, died. Stalin came along, killed Trotsky, got him out of the way, carried on. It took, after him, all the way through to the 80s for any form of thawing of those relationships with Gorbachev, what's known as the perestroika, which is the beginning of the conversation between the East and the West after the Cold War. And actually, it's a very good analogy with the Cold War because it wasn't one group. You had the Soviet Union, but you had the Chinese, who were also very communist, but under a different government, broke away from the Soviets. They refused to submit under the Soviet writ. And then you had like the Red Brigades and all forms of communist terrorist groups across the world who were armed. And they had this idea in their heads that they wanted, it was called the Communist Internationale. They wanted to export the revolution, but they weren't necessarily all under the command of the Soviet Union, because there were other authorities like the Chinese and others that came into play. But they shared the same kind of agenda, the same ideological agenda, which is communism. So likewise today, the Communist Internationale has become the Jihadist Internationale. Some may have allegiance to ISIS, some to Al-Qaeda. They fight each other sometimes, like Stalin killed Trotsky. So Al-Qaeda and ISIS will fight each other. But they all generally share this allegiance to this ideology that I refer to as Islamism, the desire to enforce a version of Islam over society. When it uses violence, I call it jihadism. That would be your second question. So let's just see if it's good. I'm encouraged.
One last question.
Okay, well, yes, if anyone else.
Anyone else?
Yep. Yep, there's a chat here. Go for it.
There are some concerns over Western countries that are arming so-called moderate rebels in Syria. What is your opinion on the effect? Obviously, you mentioned that it's only a short-term solution, but do you think that the situation could end up being the same as when Americans armed Al-Qaeda when they were supposedly moderate in the 80s?
Yeah, it could. There's a huge danger there. In fact, that's how ISIS got away with it for so long, because there was a blind spot until ISIS started beheading Americans. The Gulf countries, especially Qatar, were kind of okay with ISIS because they wanted to get rid of Assad. Turkey also had quite an open border. It wasn't clamping down on ISIS. Their enemy was Assad. So there's definitely that danger. And the reason, especially the Turkish thing, is that they would rather have somebody against Assad than have the Kurds rising up, because that would mean a chunk of their country goes as well. I'm more in favour of, I think the most effective fighters on the ground. I've got no what's the word? Dog in this race, But I genuinely think the Kurds have been the most effective secular fighting force on the ground. They're the ones who just routed ISIS from Sinjar, where last year ISIS began their slavery policy with the Yazidis. So the Kurds have proven time and again that they're able to take ISIS on and defeat them. They got them out of Kobani, now they've got them out of Sinjar the day before the Paris attacks. But there are political reasons that get in the way of the Americans supporting the Kurds, and that's the Turks don't want it to happen, the Iranians don't want it to happen, and the Iraqis don't want it to happen, because if you support the Kurds, Kurdistan as a nation will take chunks out of especially Iraq and Turkey. So politics gets in the way, unfortunately. Yeah.
So essentially, we'll be back in Assad before then, aren't we?
Well, see, what's happening now is the French are trying to get the Russians and the Americans on board with ignoring Assad and going after ISIS. If I had my way, I'd say add to that supporting the Kurds. I don't see how it can go backwards when the Kurds are already autonomous in the Syrian Kurdish region, pretty much running their own stuff, and in the Iraqi Kurdish area, they're running their own autonomous region. I don't see how they're going to cede anything after this. So short of starting another war, it may be worthwhile considering coming to some settlement with the Kurds. But that's going to have to be a conversation the Americans have with the Turkish government. And I just don't have any confidence at the moment that the Americans have a clear Middle East vision for the region. Yeah.
I think after everything that's happening now, it's starting to get a bit too late to say that war is not the only option. After now, the UK and Russia are contemplating using combined force to destroy ISIS.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying war's not the option. I'm saying it's not the solution. I think war has a place. I just don't think that we should be blinded by the fact. Look, I'll give you another example with history. Yeah. So when we defeated Nazi Germany, we were working with the USSR to defeat Nazi Germany. It didn't solve the problem of the USSR, and it didn't solve the way in which the Communist International began exporting across the world, and Berlin remained divided as a result. City was coming to the Berlin Wall, right? So all I'm saying is that if we do have to go to war, the Pope called it, everyone saw the Pope basically says World War III. If we do have to go to war, which is a scary thought, and it should only ever be the last resort, what I'm arguing is that we mustn't neglect the fact that the solution to this is to undermine the ideology in the long term, because what you're doing then is you're starving the oxygen from the recruits. We need to stop people wanting to join ISIS in the first place.
Or you still have to destroy the current ISIS.
The infrastructure, yeah. There's a strong argument to take over Raqqa right now. There's a strong argument for an international force to deprive ISIS of capital, and that would be more of a propaganda victory, I think, even though it would also be a physical victory. But the reason it would be a propaganda victory is because the very notion of a caliphate resonates with those who are supporting ISIS because of its meaning in history. And the prophecies that they are exploiting to declare the caliphate say to them that now this caliphate has been established, it's going to remain until the day of judgment. So if you wipe that out, you've just disproved all their philosophies and their prophecies. So it kind of undermines their own propaganda.
What would have happened to Maajid if
I wasn't in prison, do you mean? I have no idea. I'd like to think I would have grown up anyway. So, I have no idea. But prison, though it is very difficult and led to huge personal costs, it was, as I said, an opportunity for me to genuinely read and study and broaden my own horizons. And everything I'm doing now wouldn't be possible unless I had that experience.
Any final questions? One at the back.
It sounds like the solution is to undermine the ideology, but how do you think we can do that? Like, if there's so many people against it already, but there are still people like you who get against it, so how do you stop thinking?
Yeah, we need to organize. So people, how do we organize against? How do we push back against the ideology? Was the question. I'm saying that in the way that the U.S. civil rights movement, for example, organized and challenged segregation head-on, and it changed the culture in society. The way in which anti-homophobia campaigns have been continuing for so long in Western societies, to a point that a Catholic country like Ireland can have a referendum and vote in gay marriage equality. People need to organize on the grassroots, and so that they inoculate their own communities against the appeal of this ideology. We've got up to 2,000 people that have got up and left their very comfortable lives in Britain to join the worst terrorist group history has ever known. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. ISIS didn't radicalize those 2,000 Brits that joined them. ISIS plucked the low-hanging fruit that was already radicalized and primed because of decades of Islamist propagandizing going on within Muslim communities.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like you to